The knock came at 10:47 on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because I'd been sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at a document I'd printed 3 days earlier and hadn't told a single person about. When I opened the door, there were 4 people standing on my porch. My husband, his mother, his brother, and a woman I had never met in person, but whose face I recognized immediately from a phone I wasn't supposed to see. My husband looked at the ground. His mother didn't. She said, "We need to talk about the house." The woman beside her, the other woman, actually smiled at me, like she'd already won.
And here's the thing.
In that moment, I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door. I stepped back. I said, "Come in," because I already knew something they didn't. Something that was going to change everything about the next 15 minutes and the next 15 years of their lives. Stay with me, because by the end of the story, you're going to understand why I was the only calm person in that room. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I was married for 11 years to a man I'll call Daniel. We met when we were both 26. I was finishing a graduate degree in architecture. He was starting his second year running a small contracting business his father had left him. We fell in love the way you do when you're young enough to believe love is enough. Fast, completely, without the vocabulary to describe the cracks forming beneath it. We bought our house in year 3 of the marriage. And I want to be precise about this because it matters. We bought it. My name went on the mortgage because Daniel had debt from the business, and I had a cleaner credit history. He always said it was temporary, that once the business stabilized, he'd refinance and add his name. That never happened. I didn't know at the time that the mortgage paperwork I'd signed without fanfare would one day be the most important document I owned. For the first 7 years, I described the marriage as quietly good. Not fireworks, but steady. Daniel worked long hours. I climbed in my firm. We had routines. We had a dog named Pepper who slept at the foot of the bed. We had holidays with his family every Christmas, where I smiled through his mother's backhanded compliments about my cooking, my career, my failure to produce grandchildren. Looking back, I can see the slow erosion. But when you're in it, when the erosion happens 1 millimeter at a time, you don't see it. You just keep handing them the chisel. The cracks became visible in year 8. Daniel started coming home later. Not dramatically late, just enough to miss dinner consistently. He became protective of his phone in a way he hadn't been before. He started having opinions about my wardrobe and my friends that felt less like care and more like control. And he began spending more and more time with a woman he described as a business contact named Renee. I asked him once directly, "Is something happening with Renee?" He looked at me with complete steadiness and said, "You're paranoid." I believed him. For almost another year, I believed him. I found out the way most people find out. Not some dramatic confrontation. A phone, a counter, a name on a screen I wasn't meant to see. He'd left it face up in the kitchen while he showered. A message notification from Renee appeared. The preview showed 4 words before the screen timed out. I don't need to tell you what the 4 words were. You can guess the shape of them. What I will tell you is what I did next, because this is where this story stops being ordinary. I didn't confront him. Not that night. Not that week. Not for 3 months. Instead, I went very quiet. I smiled at dinner. I asked about his day. I continued attending his family events and laughing at his brother's terrible jokes. I kept every single thing exactly the same. And while I did that, I started making calls. The first call was to a divorce attorney. Not to file anything, just to understand the landscape. To understand what I owned, what I was owed, and what I needed to protect. The attorney was a small woman with reading glasses and a very direct manner. She asked me what my name was on. I told her. The house, the mortgage, the primary bank account. She wrote something down. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "You're in a much stronger position than most women who sit in this chair." I didn't understand the full weight of that sentence until later. The second call I made was to a private investigator because I needed documentation, not suspicion. In a state where fault can affect settlement, evidence matters. Within 6 weeks, I had photographs, dates, hotel receipts, and a paper trail that Renee herself had generated through her own sloppy financial habits. By month 2, I knew more about the affair than Daniel did about my preparations. By month 3, I had signed papers that he didn't know existed. This is the part of the story that people find either very inspiring or very unsettling, depending on who they are. While Daniel was living his double life, dinners with Renee, weekend site visits that weren't, phone calls in the car that went long, I was systematically building a fortress around everything I'd spent 11 years working for. I opened a separate bank account in my name only and began moving a percentage of my salary each month. Not a dramatic amount, nothing that would trigger questions, but enough to build a foundation. I met with my attorney 3 more times. I understood the divorce laws in my state in more detail than most paralegals. I knew what equitable distribution meant in practice, what fault-based divorce could yield, and, most critically, what happened to an asset when only one spouse's name was on it. This is the detail. This is the tiny thing they forgot. The house was in my name. Only my name. Because 11 years ago, Daniel had debt. And we'd meant to fix it. And we never did. In my state, and I want to be careful here because every state is different and you should always talk to a lawyer, property held solely in one spouse's name, purchased before or during marriage with a documented mortgage trail, has specific legal protections when that spouse is the sole signatory. It doesn't simply split 50/50ths by default. There are factors. There are arguments to be made. And there are positions to be staked early. My attorney had staked mine. I want to say something important here. I did not do anything illegal. I did not hide assets in bad faith. I did not forge documents. I did everything in my legal right as a person whose name was the only name on a mortgage. I simply stopped assuming that honesty was mutual and started acting like the woman I needed to be. By the time Daniel sat me down to tell me he hadn't been happy for years and wanted a divorce, I already had a signed retainer, a documented evidence file, and a legal strategy in place. I cried, because that part was real. And then I called my attorney. Daniel moved out 3 weeks after his confession. He went to stay with his brother, Marcus, and within days his mother, Patricia, had fully embedded herself in Team Daniel. Patricia had never fully approved of me. I was too independent, too career-focused, not sufficiently devoted to her son's comfort. When the divorce was announced, she treated it less like a family tragedy and more like a correction, as if the problem all along had been me, and this was finally being fixed. What I didn't expect was Renee. Within weeks of Daniel moving out, Renee had moved from the other woman to Daniel's partner. She was at family dinners. She was in photographs with his nieces and nephews. She was being introduced to people I'd known for a decade as though I had never existed. And then the legal pressure began. Daniel's attorney sent a letter suggesting I vacate the marital home to allow for fair assessment of assets. The framing was careful, legal, polite. But the intent was clear. They wanted me out of the house so they could move Renee in. I forwarded the letter to my attorney, who responded the next business day. The response was also polite. It cited the mortgage documentation, the sole signatory status, and a phrase I will remember for the rest of my life. Our client has no obligation to vacate property legally registered in her name alone. 3 days later, Daniel called me. He didn't say hello. He said, "My mom wants to come over and talk to you, to sort this out civilly." I agreed. I said, "Of course, anytime." What I did not say was, "I know exactly what sort this out civilly means, and I'll be ready." On Tuesday, 10:47 a.m. I had known the visit was coming. What I hadn't expected was the composition of the group. Daniel, Patricia, Marcus,
And Renee.
they brought the mistress to my house to tell me to leave. I want you to sit with that for a moment. They believed so completely that they had won. That Daniel's departure, the legal letters, the social repositioning, that they brought his girlfriend to my front door as a statement. As a kind of victory lap. The audacity was almost impressive. I let them in. I offered water. I sat across from them at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd been sitting 3 days earlier, holding the document I was about to show them. Patricia spoke first. She'd clearly rehearsed. She said they wanted to handle this maturely, that the house should go on the market, that the proceeds should be split, that dragging things out would only hurt everyone, and that Daniel and Renee needed a place to begin their life together. She actually said that. To my face. In my house. Renee had the composure to stare at her hands. I waited until Patricia finished. Then I waited 3 more seconds. I've learned that silence is a form of power most people can't tolerate. Then I set the document on the table. It was my attorney's formal legal position on the property, 14 pages, including mortgage documentation, title history, my sole signatory status, and a summary of applicable state law regarding separately held marital assets. I said, I've spoken to my attorney about the house. I'd encourage Daniel's attorney to review this before we discuss anything further. Patricia picked it up. I watched her read the first page. I watched the color change in her face. Marcus looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the table. Renee, to her credit, said nothing. Patricia put the paper down and said, This doesn't mean. I said, very quietly, it means what it says. Nobody spoke for almost 30 seconds. I know because I counted. They left within the hour.
There was no more talk of me vacating.
There was no more talk of Renee moving in. The conversation shifted, through attorneys, over the following 4 months, from she should leave the house to a negotiated settlement that reflected the actual legal reality. I kept the house. I want to be careful about what I say here because divorce law is genuinely complicated and every case is different, and I'm not a lawyer, and I don't want anyone to take this as legal advice. But in my case, in my state, with the documentation I had, the fact that the mortgage was solely in my name was a significant legal advantage that shaped the entire settlement. I also received a settlement that accounted for the years I'd contributed to the household while supporting Daniel's business stabilization, years that allowed him to avoid refinancing, which had the side effect of leaving the house in my name. He hadn't planned that. He'd just forgotten, or assumed, or never taken it seriously enough to fix. The one tiny detail they forgot was that they'd left me holding the deed. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that Tuesday morning. I still live in the house. Pepper still sleeps at the foot of the bed. I repainted the kitchen, a deep terracotta that Daniel would have hated, and I drink my coffee hot now because I leave for work when I want to. Renee and Daniel are together, as far as I know. I don't follow. I don't track. I have no interest in their story anymore, because I'm busy writing mine. Patricia has not called. Marcus sent a strange, half-apologetic text about 8 months after the settlement that I read once and did not respond to. What I want you to take from this, and I mean this genuinely, is not the revenge. Revenge is just the headline. What I want you to take is this. I did not win because I was loud. I did not win because I fought harder. I won because I was quiet when it counted, patient when it mattered, and, most importantly, I had made sure that the paperwork reflected reality before anyone decided to rewrite it. No, it's yours. Protect it before you need to. They came to my house to take it. They just forgot whose name was on the door. If you made it this far, you already know why I asked you to stay. Drop in the comments, what would you have done when you saw who was standing at that door? Would you have let them in? I'm genuinely curious, because people have very different instincts, and I've come to believe they all say something true about who we are. If this story hit something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for me, for them. And if you want more stories like this, real ones, where ordinary people find the leverage they didn't know they had, subscribe, like, and share. New story every week. I'll see you in the next one.